Welcome to the 4Heroes podcast. It was a noisy day at the local coffee shop, but we're excited to share Chaplain Frank Mercer's latest message from the 4Heroes Huddle. The focus is Joshua chapter 2. A woman named Rahab hides 2 Hebrew spies and helps them escape Jericho. She has no spiritual advantage. Rahab was a prostitute from Jericho who recognized that God was at work and chose to be on God's side. Because of her faith and action, Rahab is later listed in the Genealogy of Jesus. What an honor God gave her as a reward for her faith. We hope this episode will encourage you, no matter what you've done or where you've been, to live a life of faith.
All right, I told you that we were going to Rehab this morning, and in fact we are. We're in Joshua chapter 2, and Joshua chapter 2 begins with Joshua, our guy, sending 2 spies into Jericho. We've seen this kind of thing before, right? Remember, Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan. Joshua was one of those spies. 10 of those spies came back and said, "Oh, there are giants over there. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes and in our own eyes." I think when you've been in slavery for 400 years, you start to think about yourself a certain way. If you've ever been enslaved, addicted, bound up by something in your life, you start to think that you're less than you are. Because we're going to discover that the people in Canaan saw the Israelites very differently than the Israelites saw themselves. Anyway, Joshua's, I'm not sending 12. I understand what happens with committees. The most negative person in the room carries the conversation. We're sending 2. Just 2. And these 2 go into Jericho. They enter the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stay there. How do we know she's a prostitute?
Because the Bible tells us.
Because the Bible tells us so several times. She shows up in the book of Joshua 3 times, and every time she is referenced as a prostitute. What are these nice Hebrew boys doing, these spies, at her house? I can't tell you for certain, but I will say that it is known that often back in the day, these kinds of places functioned as an inn. Now, you can make of that what you want to. You're picturing the motel down on Cleveland Avenue that rents out by the hour. Definitely a place where men gathered and information could be gathered, and a great place to kind of get lost in the crowd if you're trying to. So I don't know exactly why, but I do know this: they were spies. I do not think that they snuck into Jericho on this mission and then immediately began to seek out female companionship. I don't think that's why they were there. But whatever the reason they were there, the king gets word that there are Israelite spies in his city, and he understands that they are in this house. So he sends a message to Rahab, the madam of the house, and says, "Bring out the men who entered your house." Which ones? Verse 4, "But the woman had taken the men and hidden them," probably not the first time she'd hidden men in her house. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. And at dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. I don't know where they came from, and I don't know where they went." I think it's called plausible deniability. Verse 6, "But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under stalks of flax. She had laid out on the roof, and so the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers were gone out, boom, the gates were shut." They shut the gates to make sure that if the spies were still in the city, They couldn't get out of the city. They were trapped. Now she goes up to the roof and says in verse 9 to the spies, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. There are giants in the land, and we are but grasshoppers in their eyes and in our own. That's not how the people in Canaan saw them. The people in Canaan's hearts were melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. That was 40 years ago. And you people are still talking about this? Yes. Yes, we are. What you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven and on the earth below. This is her profession of faith. She doesn't say, I think, I wish, I hope, I dream. No, she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. And I know that the Lord God is God in heaven and on earth. This woman has none of your spiritual advantages. Okay? She never went to a Bible study. She never came to the Huddle. She never listened to the podcast. She never went to vacation Bible school as a kid. When she was a teenager, she didn't have friends in the high school who would invite her to the lock-in for the church youth group. She had no Bible. She had no pastor. She lived in a pagan city as a prostitute, and she was the very last person you might expect to come to faith, but she came to faith. You know, they say the two most surprising things about arriving in either heaven or hell are, number one, who's not there? And number two, who is there? Because we imagine that we're going to get to heaven and everybody's going to be just like us. But God's not looking at people the way we look at people. He's not impressed. He's not impressed with me, and he's not impressed with you. He loves you, he loves me, but he's not impressed. He's not impressed by how many followers you have on social media. He's not looking at your standing in the community or your significance. He's especially not looking at your 401k or your address or your hood ornament to measure you. He does not care about those things. He is looking at your faith. And what separates Rahab from the rest of the crowd in Jericho, it's not her code of ethics. I mean, she just lied. It's not her code of ethics. It's not her superior morality or exemplary lifestyle. Certainly not. It's her faith. She had nothing to offer but faith in God. Your faith is only as good as the object of your faith. Faith in God. Rahab's life is a wreck. It's a mess. But God is taking her mess and making it her message. Her test is going to become her testimony that says God is able to redeem anyone. And y'all, it's good news, because if he can rescue and redeem her, then he can rescue and redeem the rest of us. So you've been through it, you know. You've given into the dark side. You've drifted. You've been less than. who you could have, should have been, abused and accused and baffled and befuddled and defeated and depleted. But if there's hope for Rahab, there's hope for me. If there's hope for Rahab, there's hope for you. I want to tell you something else about Rahab. This is not the only time she gets mentioned. She gets mentioned 3 times in the Old Testament in the book of Joshua. She gets mentioned 3 times in the New Testament too. She gets mentioned more times in the New Testament than Joshua does. How about that? The first time is in Matthew's genealogy. If you read Matthew chapter 1, you'd have 14 generations, and then another 14 generations, and then another 14 generations that would take you from Abraham to Jesus. You don't get to Jesus until verse 18. So it's easy to look at those words on the page and just sort of skim by. But to get to Jesus in Matthew from Abraham, guess what? You have to go through Rahab. Rahab. This girl running the place where they do those things for money. Yeah, Rahab. She's married to a guy named Salmon. You could say salmon, but I think Salmon is better. Hebrew tradition says that Salmon's one of the 2 spies. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love the idea that that could be true. We'll talk about that down the road when we get to the book of Ruth. They have a son, Salmon and Rahab. Their son's name is Boaz. And Boaz marries Ruth. Boaz learned to love an outsider because he saw his own dad love an outsider. Boaz marries Ruth, and they have a son named Obed, and Obed and Mrs. Obed, they have a son named Jesse. Well, that's a familiar name maybe. Jesse and Mrs. Jesse have a son named David. Rahab is the great-great-grandmother to King David. Who saw that coming? If you knew her past, you could have never assumed her future. Only God. Only God. Because Rahab, she is declared righteous because of her faith. Who saw that coming? And she shows up in Hebrews chapter 11. If you've been in these kind of circles very long, you've probably heard the book of Hebrews chapter 11 referred to as the Faith Hall of Fame. Because it names Old Testament hero after Old Testament hero after Old Testament hero. This is the order of the Hall of Famers, okay? Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. And then who do you think? Joshua? No! Rahab. And then James jumps in. James chapter 2. And what James suggests is that, you've known Rahab as a prostitute. He says it. But she's no longer known as Rahab the prostitute, but Rahab the righteous. That's not literally what James 2 says, but that's my interpretation of what James 2 says. She has changed. Now, I heard a pastor say, the love of God is not a reward for change. The love of God is the resource by which I am changed. So God doesn't love you because you're a good person. He doesn't love you because you went to church yesterday. He doesn't love you more if you had your quiet time this morning. He doesn't love you more because you came to the huddle. His love for you is the resource by which you are changed. And let me tell you something about God. He loved Rahab. And he loves the Rahabs of this world. more than we love the Rahabs of this world. God loves Rahab. Let me put it another way. Rahab is not defined by what she did. Rahab is not who people said she was. There are much worse words than prostitute that I'm sure were used about her every single day. Embedded into her brain, she heard it so often. She's not who other people said she was. She's not even who she thought she was. Rahab has a new name. She's been rehabilitated. Rahab the righteous. Because that's who God says she is. Who does God say you are? There is a righteousness that comes only by faith in God. And that is such good news, because there's truly no person so bad that they can't be saved. Just as there's no person so good that they don't need to be saved. Whew. So that's a lot. That's a lot to wrap your heads around. That's what I've been carrying around in my head and heart for a few days now, and it's just been about to explode before I can tell you. But that's not all I've got to say about that. There's one last thing. These Hebrew spies, they promise to treat her kindly and faithfully when God gives them the land. And we're going to read about that real soon. Not today. Verse 15, so she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. Remember, city gate is closed. It's closed so that if the spies are still in the city, they cannot escape. But Rahab's house is actually built into the wall. So the gates are shut, the doors are shut. But y'all, when all the doors and gates are shut, God opens a window. Sure enough. That's why we say you should never put a period where God puts a comma. Because when the gates and doors slam shut in your life, God is opening a window. And that is all I got to say about that. Well, let me pray for you.
Thank you for listening to the 4Heroes podcast. Our prayer is that you heard a message of hope in Rahab's story. If you feel like your faith is struggling, that's okay. We'd love to talk to you. You can email us at info@4ourheroes.org or text our chaplain directly at 770-681-5964. Because of Jesus, we can also turn directly to God with our doubts and struggles. You can pray today and ask Him to build your faith. Every time I've heard someone pray that prayer, God shows up in a big way.